Traders, how are you? Marcello, founder of the Day Trading Academy, co-founder of Speed Up Trader. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. Overall, we have a lot of good news due to the fact that we have a situation where the market is starting to open. We have a lot of states and countries that are now starting to say that we're going to start getting some openings in the economy, which is great. If you guys have any questions, don't forget, put on all the comments with hashtag AskMarcello. I'll be happy to go ahead and pull all those for you. I love to be able to share. I think it's been almost 20 years now in the financial markets, whether it's learning how to trade or teaching traders or actually trading. So definitely leave that in the comments, and also don't forget to subscribe. I'll be happy to go ahead and continue doing these videos for you since a lot of you have stated that you liked it. On Monday, we had a situation where stocks were higher. Investors started going back towards the high-tech companies, as I mentioned, that a lot of states are starting to reopen their economies, even though the lower oil prices are still being weighted as well. Tuesday, we had a situation where we had higher stocks as well. After we then had a drop as some investors started to go back towards what they consider to be safer assets, things like gold and silver, for example. Wednesday stocks are far higher. Good news about the opening of a lot of states in the U.S., or some, I should say, not all of them. And higher oil prices, and new news about the clinical trial success of the antiviral drug remdesivir. If you guys didn't hear that in the news already, it was a controlled clinical trial with placebo and everything, and it looks like there's some promising steps, so we're not going to die of the coronavirus. On Thursday, stocks fall. We have green economic news that accumulated in Europe and the United States. We did have a situation where more than 3.8 million initial claims for the U.S. unemployment benefits last week. That now puts the 6-week total to almost 30 million. I actually looked this up. If you guys look at the number of households in the United States, it's about 125 million or so, depending on what website you go to, because they have different numbers. And if that's a family unit, right? It might be... And obviously there's single people living there as well, but if you really think about that being a couple in a household, right, you have 250 million people, 30 million have now lost their jobs, almost 30 million, which means that's over 10% of all households. That's actually higher than that, but you guys get my drift. It's a significant number. Other than that, on Thursday, we had a situation, Trump threatening China with more tariffs and also weaker quarter 1 earnings reports for a lot of the tech companies. After that, on Friday, we had a situation that the market did recover a bit, even though we did have a bit of a sell-off as well. Overall, for the week, the Dow ended up 0.97%. It's still down almost 17% for 2020. S&P 500 was down 0.21% for the year, it's down 12.38%. And the NASDAQ is down for the week 0.34%, and for the year, it's down 4.10%. One good piece of news is that since the market bottom on the 23rd of March, the U.S. markets has skyrocketed roughly about 30%. We now have a situation where the S&P 500 now trades at almost 22 times projected earnings, which is the highest level since May of 2002. And that's never a good thing, because when it comes to the market, whether it's the days of an economic expansion or days that the market keeps going up, whenever we have an extreme like that where we have companies that are overly valued, right? There's a situation where that could be a meaning for a top, or obviously, the market could still be going up, because obviously it's been going up all these weeks. And in the month of March, they had their best month in a long, long time. A lot of, if I'm not mistaken, I have it written down here for you. Let me share that with you. The NASDAQ had its best month since 1987. It went up over 21%. The S&P 500 went up almost 19%. Best results since 1974. And the Dow had its best month since 2002. It went up 17.62%. So even though things, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, right? Things are going to get bad and things like that. But extremes are never a good thing. Overseas market news, the DAX was the biggest winner in Europe at 5.08%. The Merval in Argentina was the biggest winner in Latin America at almost 12%. The African and Middle Eastern market, Saudi Arabia, was the biggest winner there at 7.69%. And then Asia and Australia, the Sensex in India went up 7.63%, with the Philippines going up 4.31%. In Bitcoin and other currency news, we do have the halving coming up in about 2 weeks or so. Overnight on Thursday, it went up 18.6%, which is about 1,500 points or $1,500 or so. For the week, it went up 18.29%. And just that one night, it went up 18.6%. Imagine that. Now, the last times that we had these halving events, Bitcoin and the cryptos did surge quite a bit. In 2016, it went up 300% before the halving. And in 2012, it went up by 80 times as well. So that's definitely good news for those of you guys that trade Bitcoin in terms of volatility, right? Because we got definitely a lot of movement coming. In financial and banking news, the Bank of Japan expanded its stimulus efforts on Monday. The central bank is it's what's called quantitative easing. They're just flipping the switch, they're making money, and then they just come over here and then they just borrow it to themselves. Can you imagine if we could do that? They've decided that they're going to buy an unlimited amount of government bonds, significantly ramp up corporate bond purchases, and they're tripling the holdings of corporate debt, up $186 billion. So we talk, the United States, for example, these last few hundred years, the United States, a capitalist system where it's free market, the government or bureaucrats don't get that involved, for example, like Europe. We've had a situation where the U.S. has created the most amount of, the word I'm not looking for is richness. I'm thinking actually in Spanish. I always do these videos first in Spanish. The wealth, that's the word I'm looking for. Patrimonio in Spanish, in case you guys were wondering. The United States has created more wealth in the history of the world than at any other point in the world. So that talks about the capitalist society that we did have. Now that we have governments like Japan buying stocks, European Union going in and buying, we just have this Frankenstein financialized system now where it really only benefits the people on the top end of the bottom pole, because most people that don't have a lot of wealth, they don't have things like stocks, which continue to go up, or real estate or things like that, right? So it's not a good thing for us, but a good thing for some people. Other than that, the U.S. Central Bank is buying up to $500 billion of state and local government bonds. They actually expanded the program by allowing the municipalities that have at least 500,000 residents instead of, a minimum of 250,000 up to 500. So they actually changed it. Before it was a minimum of 250, now they have to have a minimum of 500. Other than that, the U.S. 30-year mortgage rates went down to 3.23%, which is the lowest period ever, the lowest level ever in the modern period. As expected, the applications for mortgages skyrocketed to 11.6% from last week. In commodities, we had a situation where the overall crude did recover a little bit. We have these big numbers when it comes to percentages. For example, U.S. crude went up 15.13%, but it really only went up by $1.50 or so, a little bit more than that. It went from $17.18 to $19.78. So if you guys are watching the news and things and you hear these big numbers from oil, don't believe them, because the number is so low for the price of oil. A small movement kind of sounds really big in percentage. So just keeping that in mind. International Brent went up 19.80%, right? Sounds like a lot, right? 20%, but actually only went up $26. Excuse me. It only went up about $4 or so, from $22.07 to $26.44. U.S. number one oil firm ExxonMobil lost $610 million in quarter one. It's the first quarterly loss that they've had since 1999, the merger that they had. All these oil companies are talking about slashing costs and putting their budget down as well, because obviously they're not doing very well. Shell, which is one of the biggest oil companies in the world, if not the biggest, they only lost $24 million in the first quarter. They decided to slash their dividend 66%, while all of these other oil companies, talking about Chevron and BP and some of the others. I actually did a video about the dividends, and if you diversified that in between the different dividends, especially when oil went down, right? Shell, for example, was at 18% at its low. If you would have had the foresight that I talked about in the video about these dividend companies, even now when they slashed it, you would still have a great percentage. Right now it's about 4%. I think the price is at about $34 for Shell. But if you would have bought it, I'll do the math for you now. Well, actually, I'll continue. If you guys have questions on that, let me know. Just leave them there with hashtag #SMartShell, and I'll pull the questions. Other than that, Chevron, number 2 U.S. oil company, also talking about slashing their costs and dividends, and this is kind of across the board for all of the oil companies. In political news, Trump signed an executive order defending to activate the U.S. Defense Production Act that compels slaughterhouses to remain open as part of critical infrastructure. This is setting up a bit of a fight between the unions that are saying that they need to protect their workers from the pandemic, and a lot of these companies that say, or not the company, but the government is saying that they need to stay open and continue to produce meat for everything. UN experts on human rights are urging the U.S. administration to lift an embargo on communist Cuba, stating that they are having a hard time fighting the pandemic and they would need that lifted in order to do so. UK is confident that they can get a future trade deal with the bureaucratic European Union in 2020. You know, one of the things that you guys need to think about, for example, the new space race, which I have news here about that. There's a reason why a lot of these companies, especially these new industries, actually start in the United States, and it has to do with that capitalist society where free markets, less regulation, less bureaucracy in the system. And you guys can see that Europe doesn't really have a lot of these companies. We've had some of them come up, but they don't really have that kind of environment, let's say, for innovation and things like that. And that's part of the reason why you can see, for example, that now, you know, Google, Facebook, Amazon, all of these international powerhouses all started in the United States. And that's kind of the difference now that you can see, because to me, UK is caught in the middle in culture also between the United States and Europe, where they're not as, you know, socialist, or let's say socialist isn't the right word. It's not as bureaucratic and, you know, government needs to control everything as Europe wants to be, compared with the US now that they're going in a different direction, especially with Trump with removing the regulations. The last time I heard, they removed 7 regulations for every one that we had on the book. So UK's kind of stuck in between, where they're a little bit more open-minded, more innovative, a little bit more capitalistic compared to Europe. And Europe really has not been very good on the negotiating end, let's say. So hopefully they'll get a deal, because obviously I think what UK should do is they should just say, you know, give a huge tax benefit to have a lot of these companies come and open up their corporate offices and give them benefits in the UK. And then that way, instead of coming from Europe, they'll come to the UK. Other than that, Bolivia's opposition-controlled parliament passed a law stating that they want to have presidential elections in the next 90 days. There was obviously outcry from Janine Áñez, which is the country's interim president, which wasn't voted for. She has helped put Bolivia under a mandatory pandemic lockdown. In economic news, not very good news for the economy in the U.S. At an annualized rate, the Q1 GDP went down 4.8%. The second quarter is expected to be about a negative 40%. That technically puts the United States in a recession, even though it's not reported yet. Remember that whenever we have an economic contraction, we need 2 quarters of contraction. So confirmed first quarter contraction. The second quarter, which is April, May, June, we're definitely going to be negative. So we're officially in a recession. The longest expansion in the nation's history has now come to a close. Consumer spending fell by the most on record from month to month in the month of March, 7.5%, and the manufacturing activity also plunged an 11-year low in April. Other than that, in corporate news, General Motors, due to the situation with the pandemic, since they're literally not selling cars, has decided to cut their cash dividend on common stock and also suspend buybacks. You know, a lot of these companies, I think it's funny, a lot of the airlines, they spent $40 billion or however many billions of dollars buying their own shares back, and now they want a government bailout. What the government should do is make them sell all that stock at a loss, right, to get some of that capital back, and then give them the loan after the sale of all those stocks. Boeing is also saying that it's going to borrow more money over the next 6 months. They tapped out all of their credit lines. They want to borrow about $25 billion, and it doesn't expect to pay dividends for years, as they don't want to take a government bailout. Alphabet's Google. Google, the company, is owned by a company called Alphabet, if you didn't know. Posted very strong Q1 figures, even as they saw a March slowdown. A lot of big travel booking names cut their multi-billion-dollar budgets by 50 to 80%, and Alphabet still receives 99% of their revenue from Google. So, they tried to invest in other things. For example, Alphabet owns Google, and they still receive, even though they have a bunch of other companies, 99% of their revenue from Google, and Google receives 84% of their revenue from ads online. Imagine that. Q1, the firm grew the revenue by 13%. Operating income went up by 19%. Facebook saw the slowing of revenue in March. April shared their stabilization of its advertisement revenue after pricing for ads saw sharp declines. So they essentially reported that their ad sales and revenue went down in March, but it did stabilize in April, and that stabilized the stock, and it went back up again. Their market cap went up above $500 billion again. In trade news, China's ambassador to Australia, Xinye Cheng, warns that Australian beef sales to China could be further negatively impacted if the government of Australia does continue to demand an inquiry about the coronavirus outbreak, and also supposed misinformation about the Chinese, what they're saying about the Chinese in regards to the pandemic. If you guys don't remember, the World Health Organization, WHO, said that the coronavirus couldn't be contracted by person-to-person transmission. I mean, really, guys? Really? So, a little bit of a war going on there. India ships 50 million tablets of hydroxychloroquine, the anti-malarial drug that Trump did tout in a lot of his press briefings. An Indian source for the exports are saying, even though U.S. regulators are warning that the anti-malarial drug does have a lot of harmful side effects. So that's something to consider as well. In technology, they did have, I mentioned the remdesivir, the clinical trials, positive news about the drug that can help to treat the coronavirus. And if you guys look, the actual deaths of the coronavirus really aren't that bad. It's mostly people that are already compromised immune system. The CDC actually let a report that they're changing in Pennsylvania, the coroners as well. If someone dies of anything and they have the coronavirus, they're putting it under coronavirus. So the actual deaths of the coronavirus is starting to come out is no worse than the actual flu. So hopefully we'll have a situation where a lot of the economy continues to open up again. So, I'm not saying you shouldn't take care of yourself, wear your mask, do everything that you believe that you have to do, but it's not as bad as what we were initially told it was going to be, when the WHO said that it wasn't so contagious from person to person. Other than that, global smartphone production expected to slump a record 16.5% to just 287 million phones in Q2. Monday, Airbus, the airplane maker out of Europe, says that it's going to furlough 3,200 staff as it gives the worst assessment of the expected outcome for them. They're warning the company's 135 workers to brace for even more job cuts, because obviously now none of the airlines are buying any new jets due to the demand collapsing from the coronavirus. Other than that, Norwegian oil firm Equinor slashed its dividend by 67% last week. And as I mentioned to you guys, the other oil companies actually aren't cutting their dividends at all, other than Shell. In international events, the Johns Hopkins, from their data, the universal number from their reports of the coronavirus cases worldwide is about 3.21 million people. There's been about 228,000 deaths. And of those, about 983,547 people have actually recovered. In the Middle East, Israel is planning on annexing part of the West Bank, as Arab nations are condemning that action. They're saying that it's a new war crime against the Palestinians, and the Prime Minister Netanyahu created a new government, and they are supposed to have new cabinet discussions starting July 1st. Other than that, Germany is also planning on reopening playgrounds, museums, and churches next Monday to go with the small shops that reopen this week, and they're going to decide within days about opening schools and sports events. And in the interesting things this week, Germany is joining other countries by tabulating the total cost of the damage of the coronavirus, because, remember, it can't be spread from person to person, as the WHO used to say. It's at 162 billion, the cost. And there's a German tabloid called Bild that is actually invoicing China for that damage. Silicon Valley, Elon Musk, and Mark Zuckerberg are at oppositions about what we should do in regards to the coronavirus lockdown. Elon Musk is saying that it's fascist and they should open. Mark Zuckerberg, which is benefiting because everybody's online and clicking on ads, saying that we should be more safe and be careful opening up the economy. Other than that, Japan is now using hotels to house patients who test positive for the virus that don't have significant symptoms. And also we have a situation where Tesla collapsed from 760 to about 700 after recovering a little bit after Elon Musk said that his price of the stock is way too high. And North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has appeared after the big tabloid and fiasco saying that he was sick or he might be dead. He attended a fertilizer factory opening on May Day, which is the first public appearance since those reports came out. So that's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next week.